Hi there. In this screencast, I'll be covering how to set up Unity for Windows in order to build an augmented reality app that leverages Google's AR Core framework. Before we begin, you'll want to ensure that you have a device that can run AR Core. You can take a look at this expanding list at developers.google.com/AR. Click Discover and Supported Devices. The site is also where a lot of the resources we'll be using are located or linked to, including the AR Core Unity package, as well as documentation that will help us build our app. Before we can do that, we'll need to get our machine set up with the tools required. Now, in order to keep these instructions relevant as long as possible, I'll be locating the tools by Google search in case they move from their current locations, but you may want to bookmark some of these pages as you'll be returning frequently. Okay. So what tools are required to get an AR Core app running on our Android phone? There are 4 tools that we'll need. Our game engine, Unity, which serves as our development environment for building our app. We'll need the Android SDK in order to target our device hardware, and we'll also need the Java development kit to compile our app for the Android operating system. And then finally, once those are all installed, we'll need Google's AR Core Unity package. Now don't worry if you don't know what any of these tools are. They'll become increasingly familiar after we install them. And some of them, like JDK and the Android SDK, you can simply install and then forget about, as we'll be accessing them through Unity. Let's start with those background dependencies that we can install and simply forget about. I found on Mac and especially Windows it can save headaches to have them in place before installing Unity so that locations are found automatically without having to troubleshoot. Don't worry if you've already installed JDK or already have Android development tools installed, however. Unity continues to get better at linking to them without error. Let's start with JDK. Simple search for that, and the first link will bring you to Oracle's site, but you'll want to take care here. All Android apps, including those built in Unity for AR, must be compiled to Java bytecode. But at this time, Unity only supports JDK 8. So make sure that this is the version that you download and install. It'll require scrolling down past 10 here. And once we click on Download JDK 8, we'll have a platform selection page. And in our case now, Windows 64-bit is what we're looking for. We'll have to click to accept the license agreement and choose to download it. Next, while that's downloading, let's search for Android Studio and install the Android SDK. Search for Android Studio. Again, the first link. And here we have some options. Although it's possible to install the SDK platform tools themselves from zip archives, which if you want to go that route, I believe are still located at the very bottom of this. There they are. I find it's well worth it to just install Android Studio. This will include the SDK manager that will update our Android SDK and platform tools as features are added. It's also far easier to debug missing target platform errors inside of Unity if we have a clear graphical UI showing us what SDK components are installed. Finally, let's pull down Unity itself. Their front page, unity3d.com, changes frequently, so if you want to jump to the download page, it's at store.unity.com. Click on Personal, accept the terms of service, and download the installer for Windows. Now you can use Unity Hub. I do use Unity Hub myself, but it's mainly for managing multiple versions of Unity. So if you have other Unity projects, I do recommend using Hub. To keep things simple for now, though, we'll simply download the installer for Windows. Here we have the installers for our core tool set. So let's start with JDK. Each of these will ask for admin privileges, so it's worth noting that you should be logged into Windows with an administrative account, obviously. Okay. So again, make sure that you're installing Java Development Kit 8. The update version can change as long as you're running JDK 8. You should be in good shape. We'll go ahead and leave all of the defaults for all of these. Simply click Next. The default folders are fine. And hopefully you should see JDK 8 successfully installed. Go ahead and hit Close, and let's move on to our next dependency, Android Studio. And again, you can use the Android Studio platform tools if you're already an Android developer and know what those are. Feel free to go and install the current platform tools for Android 7. However, I highly recommend, even as an Android developer, I use Android Studio, again, for the SDK manager to make sure that everything is current and up to date. Now you can save a little bit of space by removing the Android virtual device. We won't be using the emulator for testing AR Core as we require an actual device camera. So that's one area, and if you actually have an Android, I find it's always better to just compile and run to the device. So that's one area you can save space, but you can also leave that checked if you want to have virtualization. Default locations are fine. And obviously this will take a few minutes on your system, so I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to its completion, but feel free to pause the video and resume once yours is done. Okay, installation's complete. And we'll go ahead and leave Start Android Studio checked because although we've installed Android Studio, we'll still need to set up the SDK for our device. All right, so this is the welcome screen that greets you when Android Studio first launches. Down here under Configure, you'll see an events box will tell you if plugins need updates. We're going to do that, but let's go ahead and do that from inside the SDK Manager. If you hit Configure, SDK Manager, that will bring this up. And you can see that the default Android install has already installed SDKs for 7 through 8, which are the current versions of Android, and all of that looks good. Also note, importantly, because Unity may ask us for this later, the Android SDK location, if you're on Windows, is going to be C users, your username, app data, local, and Android SDK. You can go ahead and copy this address, or you can return to it later. This is the default path, and again, Unity should have no trouble finding this on its own. But if you do receive an error about finding the SDK, this is the path, and you can always locate it by launching the SDK Manager. So we'll now go ahead and click on Update for our plugins. And this is going to update our Android tools to the current version, which as of now is 26.1.1. We'll go ahead and say Update Now. And some more downloading will occur from within Android Studio. So again, these are tools that you could download directly from the Android site, but I find having a manager to be able to uninstall old versions and install new versions as they come out is well worth the effort. Also, there are some things that we may be doing down the road with AR Core that will require the use of Android Studio, as new capabilities for the platform tend to first become available inside of Android Studio and then in Unity shortly thereafter. Now we'll hit Finish, and with no more flags inside Android Studio, we're ready to install Unity. Let's go ahead and launch the Unity Download Assistant. Hit Next, accept the agreement, and here are the components we'll be installing with Unity. You may find that a different set of checks comes up for you. Depending on what you're trying to do, and if you're building for other platforms, you may want to check those. In our case, and for what we're doing, just focused on AR Core, the only thing that we need to have checked, other than the editor itself up here, is Android build support. If Android build support and Unity are checked, you're in good shape to go. I find it's worth unchecking both documentation, standard assets, and example project, as those are relatively hefty as a download together. The documentation is more up to date online anyway, and neither the example project nor the standard assets will be of any use to us for AR development. Choose Next. Again, choose your default Unity location. C program files, Unity is fine. You can also choose to name it by version, which is what I tend to do, just so that there's no confusing what's installed. So we'll call this Unity 2018.1.5, what we're installing, and we'll hit Next. Depending on the speed of your connection, this could take more than an hour. So you may want to go and come back, but for the most part, this should go pretty rapidly. The actual download, I think, is somewhere around 800 megabytes or so, and everything will decompress to about 3 gigabytes. Okay, hopefully you should see that Unity's been installed, and go ahead and click Finish. And now we're all set. With that, you'll have the Unity icon on your desktop, and we can go ahead and launch and get started.